Special thanks to Joyce, Carr, and Kim for supporting me on Ko-fi. You too can help by clicking on the link in the description. Months ago, the following question was posed on my community page. Which version of Lizzie Borden's story should I examine? 67% went with the one starring Chloë Sevigny and Kristen Stewart. For this analysis, I'm taking a slightly unorthodox approach and assuming Lizzie was guilty. Why? Well, she shared numerous similarities with O.J. Simpson. Both were aided by marginalized groups, had the odds stacked against them,
as well as the evidence to back it up.
Were absolved of any wrongdoing. And that's just the start. So, without further ado, let's look at the real story behind Lizzie. The Gilded Age. A time in which women demanded more from men. Some prosperous families even allowed their daughters to attend college and seek employment. Others weren't as generous. Andrew Borden has been described as everything from dignified and generous to close-fisted and stubborn. One thing's for sure, he was accustomed to a different lifestyle than his daughters. Andrew began in carpentry and worked his way up the ladder. He eventually carved out a respectable career for himself in real estate. At one point, Andrew offered to help his sister buy a homestead near him in Fall River, Massachusetts. While trying to, he unexpectedly hit her with an additional water tax. I am sure business dealings like this one, which obviously didn't exclude Andrew's own flesh and blood, were what helped him earn his fortune. It probably didn't make Andrew the easiest to live under, though. Yes, live under. If a woman wasn't employed, chances are her finances were dictated by whichever man ranked highest in the household. It could be a husband or a brother. For Lizzie Andrew Borden, it was her hard-nosed father. On July 19th, 1860, Sarah Borden gave birth to the youngest of her two daughters. A few years later, Lizzie Borden and Emma Borden were left motherless. Sarah passed away from uterine congestion. Andrew Borden was doubtlessly grief-stricken. Moreover, the country was in the midst of a civil war. Around 620,000 soldiers were killed. Believe it or not, fewer Americans died during the Revolutionary War, the Mexican War, the Korean War, and both world wars combined. He likely saw many of his neighbors leave, never to return. When the war finally ended, so did Andrew's celibacy. He married Abby in 1865. His daughters weren't pleased, particularly Lizzie. She flat out refused to address Abby as anything other than Mrs. Borden. Leonard Rebello, the biographer for Lizzie Borden Past and Present, a comprehensive reference to the life and times of Lizzie Borden, uncovered an interesting statement made by her friend Alice Russell. The father was the head of the house. They had to do as he thought. Mrs. Borden did not control the house. The whole summing up of it was that Mr. Borden was a plain living man with rigid ideas and very set. He earned his money and he did not care for the things young women in their position naturally would. Everybody knew what Andrew Borden's ideas were. He did not care for anything different. It always seemed to me as if he did not see why they, Emma and Lizzie, should care for anything different. They had quite refined ideas, and they would have liked to have been culture girls, and would like to have had different advantages, and it would be natural for girls to express themselves that way. I think it would have been unnatural if they had not. Lizzie Borden was part of the WCTU, short for Women's Christian Temperance Union. Best known for their prominent role in Prohibition, they believed a sober country was a better country. This may have been true. Nevertheless, it removed a precious freedom from anyone who liked the occasional tipple. The organization wasn't all bad. They were the first of their kind to raise awareness against domestic violence. The WCTU also fought to establish living wages, improve working conditions, raise the age of consent, and more. They must have opened small-town minds like Lizzie's to the idea of a better, more fulfilling future. In 1890, Lizzie Borden, along with a couple of others, crossed the Atlantic Ocean. For 3 months, she explored Europe's most celebrated sights and sounds. The experience was transformative. Lizzie brought home countless pictures and painstakingly secured each one in a large album. Alongside them, she wrote various tidbits of information. The album became her most prized possession as she was constantly showing it off. Her return must have been devastating. How could it not? Lizzie was a high school dropout. She never married nor furthered her education. Therefore, Lizzie's only hope for ongoing financial stability was to remain at home. She participated in church socials, such as the WCTU, and that's it. Any other spare moment Lizzie had was spent catering to the needs of her father and home. While voyaging back to America, Lizzie confided in one of her travel companions. She described home as an unhappy place and regretted leaving Europe. Look, some women enjoy being homemakers. Lizzie was not one of them.
All seemed calm on the morning of August 4th, 1892. The bees were buzzing, the milkman was delivering, the birds were chirping, the sun was shining.
Suddenly, an earth-shattering cry rang out from the Borden residence. Andrew was unrecognizable. His face and head had received 10 obliterating whacks. He was found on the sitting room sofa, all while Abby lay motionless upstairs. She had been struck 18 times in the head and once on the back of her neck. The murder weapon? A large hatchet. Every great mystery poses a series of questions, yet only one ranks supreme. Who did it? By that I mean, who kidnapped the socialite? Who stole the diamond? Who wrote the death threat? For Lizzie Borden, it's never a question of who, but why. Her story has been reenacted for theater, radio, music, and of course, film. The same conclusions are typically drawn. She killed out of love for someone else or herself. Lizzie's most recent depiction evaluates both. After staying at the Borden residence, now a certified bed and breakfast, Chloë Sevigny began researching. She teamed up with budding screenwriter Bryce Cass. HBO swiftly bought in. The project went through a few years of typical development hell until it was ultimately given the hatchet. He and Chloë took the blow in stride. They bought back the rights and kept going. Maybe the project would be better suited as a theatrical release. The film was shot on a tight budget in historic Savannah, Georgia. There's just one problem. The city bore little resemblance to 19th century New England. As a result, most of it took place indoors. A decision that I believe works in the film's favor. Each scene is either lit naturally or with candles. They all possess a looming sense of dread that never really dissipates, similar to the others. Another psychological thriller about an imprisoned woman. Although her captivity comes from within, she's the warden, not anyone else. Lizzie Borden, meanwhile, has the opposite problem. One moment she's at the mercy of Andrew Borden. Next, it's Emma Borden. The family was incredibly private, hence why many of these more intimate details can't be confirmed. They're purely speculative. In 1893, New Bedford was filled with spectators, many of whom were women, eager to glimpse the 5'4" defendant. Lizzie Borden arrived in court and kept her face hidden behind a fan. No amount of accessories could shield Lizzie from public scrutiny. Some thought she had old-fashioned taste, while others noted the largeness of her jawline. Fortunately for Lizzie, she also had supporters. They included avid churchgoers, members of the WCTU, and George D. Robinson, a Massachusetts native who served as the state's governor. George eventually left politics behind and returned to his private law practice. That's when he received $25,000 from Lizzie. Throughout the trial, newspapers weren't adverse to baiting their readers. Take Lizzie Borden in a faint, overcome by the prosecution's story of the murder as an example. The moment appeared far more dramatic than it actually was. One sketch artist even changed her from sitting to standing. This in turn made Lizzie look as if she was monologuing. The prosecution's problems didn't stop there, though. Some of their best evidence was deemed unusable. For instance, her testimony was excluded due to not having yet been arrested. Lizzie was also unaware anything she said during the inquest could incriminate her. Lizzie repeatedly contradicted herself and came across as aggressive. Quite different from the little lady who'd faint without warning. The prosecution was so confident in her testimony that they labeled it a confession. The dismissal was more than a setback. It destroyed any remaining chance the prosecution had at putting Lizzie behind bars. The jury was always gonna rule not guilty. I mean, they were composed of 12 men, for God's sake. Admitting the truth meant any woman could enact the same violence, even their own wives, sisters, or daughters. That was far scarier than acquitting a 32-year-old spinster. A couple of journalists took issue with this, most notably James W. Clark from the New York Recorder. He explained that a jury ought to be composed of men and women, and that a woman especially should have a jury of her peers, not her sovereigns, as in the case of Lizzie Borden. James is right. Sexist, but right. Only those living in a similar predicament as Lizzie could have judged her culpability. Unfortunately, Massachusetts wouldn't see a female juror until the 20th century. Lizzie Borden spent the remainder of her life in Fall River. Long gone were the days when she was embraced as one of the community. Lizzie was an oddity, a walking sideshow for neighbors to gawk at and gossip about. The few friends she had left, however, knew someone very different. Lizzie may have inherited her father's fortune, but that didn't mean she also inherited his penny-pitching habits. Quite the contrary. Lizzie would often give thoughtful gifts, expecting nothing in return. Call it remorse, but I believe her generosity went much deeper than that. Lizzie was known to help others obtain the college education that she herself lacked. This included her housekeeper's only daughter, Alice Soderman, who went on to become an architect. Most women couldn't have even dreamed of such a lofty career. Yet she realized it with Lizzie's help. Lizzie Borden succumbed to myocarditis on June 1st, 1927. In her will, she named Alice Soderman as a beneficiary. She received a jeweled watch and chain along with $2,000. $30,000 more went to the Animal Rescue League, a charity Lizzie had supported early from its inception. It's amazing that someone who did a lifetime's worth of good could only be remembered for one day. Admittedly, one very bad day. That isn't to excuse her behavior, it's just intriguing. In the wake of such social movements as Me Too, more are bound to empathize with Lizzie Borden, simply because being female now has just as many challenges as it did then. If her story teaches us anything, it's this: there are limits. We can only be pushed so far before something inside us breaks, shatters into irreparable pieces. In an interview with Town and Country, Chloë Sevigny admitted her film isn't a beat-for-beat reenactment. It's instead a vessel to critique the patriarchy of then and now. There's the film's murder scene, which is graphic and shocking in light of the buttoned-up Lizzie we see earlier. What was it like to shoot something so wild? Chloë responded with, "She's so constrained in the whole movie that I really wanted it to be cathartic for her and to the audience. There are theories that maybe she was in an epileptic state when it happened, but I was just thinking about all of the rage women have. She's very much smashing the patriarchy." Thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a long time since I've done a video, and that wasn't my intention. I did have something else in store, but that ended up not working out, so yeah. Also, if you have any ideas for any upcoming videos related to true crime, let me know in the comment section below. Please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified about any other videos I do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys!